It was one of those summer evenings where everyone in the neighborhood seemed to be outside. The smell of barbecue filled the air, and laughter echoed from backyard to backyard. David had almost stayed home that Saturday, after a long week at the office. The last thing he wanted was to make small talk with neighbors he barely knew. But his friend Tom had insisted, practically dragging him out of his apartment. "You can't keep hiding in there forever," Tom had said. "When's the last time you actually talked to someone who wasn't asking for quarterly reports?" David couldn't argue with that logic. His last relationship had ended 6 months ago, and since then, work had become his entire world. He grabbed a bottle of wine from his kitchen counter and walked 3 houses down to where music was playing, and people were gathered around a smoking grill. The moment he stepped into the backyard, he noticed her. She was standing near the garden, laughing at something an elderly woman was saying. Her laugh was genuine, not the fake kind people put on at parties. She had shoulder-length brown hair that caught the evening light, and she was wearing a simple blue dress that somehow looked perfect on her. David found himself watching her. As she moved through the crowd, she seemed to know everyone, stopping to compliment someone's new haircut, asking another person about their recent vacation. There was something magnetic about the way she connected with people. She made each conversation seem like the most important thing in the world. "That's Lisa," Tom said, appearing beside him with 2 cold drinks. "She moved in about 3 months ago. Works at the downtown library. Really nice person." Before David could respond, she was walking toward them. Her smile was warm and inviting, and when she extended her hand, her grip was firm but gentle. "You must be David," she said. "Tom's told me so much about you. I hear you make the best pasta salad in the building." David felt his cheeks warm slightly. "Tom exaggerates everything, but I do okay in the kitchen." "Don't be modest," she laughed. "I've been living on takeout since I moved here. Someone who can actually cook sounds like a superhero to me." They talked for nearly an hour. Lisa asked about his work at the marketing firm, and actually seemed interested when he explained his latest project. She told him about her job at the library, how she loved helping people find exactly the book they didn't know they were looking for. When he mentioned that he enjoyed hiking on weekends, her eyes lit up. "No way, I've been wanting to explore some of the trails around here, but I haven't found anyone to go with yet. Most of my friends think hiking means walking from the car to the mall entrance." They discovered they both loved old movies, especially the black and white classics that nobody seemed to watch anymore. Lisa had actually seen Casablanca in a theater during a special screening, something David had always wanted to do but never got around to. "We should go together next time there's a showing," she suggested casually. "I mean, if you like to." David felt something he hadn't experienced in months, genuine excitement about spending time with someone. "I'd really like that." As the evening wound down, Lisa walked with him toward the front of the house. The streetlights had just come on, casting a soft glow over the quiet neighborhood. "Thank you for such a lovely evening," she said. "I haven't had conversations like that in a long time. Most people just want to talk about themselves." "Thank you," David replied. "I almost didn't come tonight. I'm really glad I did." They exchanged phone numbers, and Lisa promised to text him about some hiking trails she'd been researching. As David walked home, he found himself smiling for no particular reason. True to her word, Lisa texted him the next day, not just about hiking trails, but sharing a funny story about a patron of the library who had asked for a book about that famous ship that hit the ice thing. They started texting regularly, sharing little moments from their days. Their first date was a hike at a nearby state park. Lisa showed up with a proper backpack, good hiking boots, and enough snacks for a small army. She was prepared but not overly fussy about it. When they reached a viewpoint overlooking the valley, she sat on a rock and pulled out a thermos of coffee. "I thought you might want something warm," she said, pouring him a cup. "You mentioned you're not really a morning person." It was such a small gesture, but it meant everything. She had listened to something he'd said in passing and remembered it. David couldn't recall the last time someone had paid that kind of attention to his words. Over the following weeks, Lisa continued to surprise him with her thoughtfulness. She remembered that he had an important presentation coming up and sent him a text wishing him luck. When he mentioned feeling stressed about a difficult client, she showed up at his office during lunch with his favorite sandwich from a deli across town. "I was in the neighborhood anyway," she said. Though David knew the deli was nowhere near the library where she worked, his friends were impressed. When they met her at dinner parties, Lisa would ask thoughtful questions and remember details from previous conversations. She complimented his friend's girlfriend on a new job promotion, having remembered it from a conversation weeks earlier. She brought homemade cookies to game night and insisted on helping clean up afterward. "Where did you find her?" his friend Mike asked after Lisa had gone home early, claiming she wanted to give the guys time to catch up. "She's like the perfect woman." David's family loved her too. When he brought her to his sister's birthday party, Lisa spent time talking with his elderly aunt about gardening, genuinely interested in learning about growing tomatoes. She offered to help his mother in the kitchen and laughed at his father's terrible jokes like they were the funniest things she'd ever heard. "She's wonderful, David," his mother said later. "You can tell she really cares about you." Everything felt perfect. Lisa seemed to understand him in ways his previous girlfriends never had. She knew when he needed space after a difficult day at work, but also knew when he needed someone to talk to. She would suggest watching one of their favorite old movies when he seemed stressed, or surprise him with tickets to a concert when she sensed he needed something to look forward to. The only tiny moments that gave him pause were so small he almost dismissed them entirely. Sometimes, when they were out with friends, Lisa would gently correct something he said. "Oh, David means the blue restaurant, not the red one," she'd say with a smile. "You know how men are with colors." Everyone would laugh, including David. But something about it felt slightly off. Or the way she would squeeze his hand just a little too tightly when he was telling a story she'd already heard. Her smile never faltered, but her grip would tighten just enough to make him aware of it. He told himself she was probably just excited to hear him talk, maybe proud to show him off to their friends. There were moments when she would make jokes that had a sharp edge to them. "David's so lucky he has me to remember things for him," she'd say when he forgot to mention a change in dinner plans. "His brain is so focused on work. Sometimes I think the rest of us disappear completely." People would chuckle, and David would feel a small knot in his stomach that he couldn't quite explain. But Lisa's hand would find his, her thumb tracing gentle circles on his palm, and he pushed the feeling away. She was probably just being playful. Everyone seemed to think they were the perfect couple. After 18 months together, David knew he wanted to spend his life with her. Lisa had become his best friend, his confidant, his partner in everything. She had made his world brighter and fuller in ways he hadn't known were possible. The proposal weekend was everything he had dreamed it would be. They drove to a small mountain cabin they'd visited before, the place where they'd had their first real conversation about the future. As the sun set over the lake, David got down on one knee and asked Lisa to marry him. Her reaction was everything he could have hoped for. Tears, laughter, and an enthusiastic yes that echoed across the water. She immediately called her parents, then his, sharing the joy with everyone who mattered to them. "I can't wait to be your wife," she whispered that night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest. "We're going to have such a beautiful life together." David fell asleep holding her, feeling like the luckiest man in the world. He had no way of knowing that the woman who had just agreed to marry him was about to show him a completely different side of herself. The mask was about to slip, and the real Lisa was waiting just beneath the surface. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather and even more perfect smiles. Lisa looked absolutely stunning in her white dress, greeting every guest with warmth and grace. She hugged David's grandmother extra long, complimented his college friends on how handsome they looked in their suits, and made sure everyone felt special and welcome. "Your bride is absolutely glowing," the photographer said to David as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "You can tell she's truly happy." David smiled, feeling proud and grateful. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one who made everyone around her feel important and valued. as he watched her laugh with the bridesmaids. He couldn't imagine feeling any luckier. But as they posed for photos before the ceremony, something shifted. During a quiet moment when the photographer was changing lenses, Lisa leaned close to David's ear. "Your tie is crooked again," she whispered, her voice sharp despite her smile. "And stand up straighter. You look like you're slouching in every photo." David quickly adjusted his posture, surprised by the sudden criticism. Before he could respond, the photographer was ready again, and Lisa's bright smile returned as if nothing had happened. During the ceremony, she was the picture of a radiant bride. Her vows were beautiful and heartfelt, bringing tears to many of the guests' eyes. But as they walked back down the aisle together, her grip on his arm was tighter than necessary. "You were rushing through your vows," she said quietly, still smiling and waving at their guests. "I could barely understand what you were saying." David felt confused. He thought his vows had gone well. Several people had complimented him afterward, but Lisa seemed genuinely upset, so maybe he had been nervous and spoken too quickly. At the reception, Lisa was in her element. She made sure to talk to every table, remembering details about guests she'd only met once or twice. She danced with David's father, laughed at his uncle's stories, and gave a toast that had everyone reaching for their tissues. "David is the kindest, most wonderful man I've ever known," she said, looking directly at him with such love in her eyes. "I feel so blessed to call him my husband." The crowd erupted in applause, and David felt his heart swell with emotion. This was his wife, his partner, the woman who loved him enough to spend her life with him. But during their first dance, as everyone watched and smiled, Lisa's whispered words told a different story. "You're off rhythm again," she said softly, her smile never wavering. "Just follow my lead and try not to embarrass us." David tried to adjust his steps, but now he felt self-conscious and clumsy. The dance that was supposed to be romantic and special became an exercise in trying not to mess up. When it ended, everyone cheered, completely unaware of the tension he was feeling. The honeymoon was a mixture of magical moments and confusing encounters. In public, at restaurants and tourist spots, Lisa was the perfect new wife. She held his hand, took selfies of them together, and talked excitedly about their future plans. But back in their hotel room, she had opinions about everything he did. The way he unpacked his suitcase was messy. He was taking too long to get ready for dinner. He shouldn't have ordered the fish because it made him smell weird for the rest of the evening. "I'm just trying to help you," she would say when he looked hurt by her comments. A good wife should help her husband be the best version of himself. David told himself she was probably just stressed from the wedding and adjusting to married life. Everyone said the first year of marriage was the hardest. Maybe this was normal. When they returned home and settled into their routine, the pattern became clearer in front of friends and family. Lisa was everything David had fallen in love with. She would brag about his promotion at work, cook his favorite meals when they had guests over, and constantly refer to him as "my amazing husband." But when they were alone, nothing he did seemed right. His morning routine took too long and made them late for everything. He left dishes in the sink instead of putting them directly in the dishwasher. He watched too much sports on weekends instead of spending quality time with her. "I don't understand why you can't just pay attention to these things," she would say, her voice filled with disappointment. "It's like you don't care about making our home nice." The criticism started affecting how David felt about himself. He began double-checking everything he did, trying to anticipate what might upset Lisa next. He would rehearse conversations in his head before having them, hoping to avoid saying something wrong. At dinner parties with friends, Lisa would tell funny stories about David's absent-mindedness. "He put his keys in the refrigerator last week." She would laugh, and everyone would join in. "I swear, without me, he'd probably forget his own name." David would smile and laugh along, but inside he felt small and embarrassed. These weren't lies exactly, but the way Lisa told them made him sound incompetent and foolish. She always delivered these stories with such affection that no one questioned whether they might be hurtful. The physical signs started small. During conversations with friends, if David said something Lisa disagreed with, she would reach over and pinch his arm under the table. It wasn't hard enough to cause real pain, but it was enough to get his attention and make him stop talking. Just keeping you on track, honey, she would say with a sweet smile if he looked at her questioning at social gatherings. Lisa began speaking for David more often. When someone asked him about work, she would jump in with her own version of his day. When friends invited them to events, she would accept or decline without consulting him first. David's so busy with work, he doesn't have time to keep track of our social calendar. She would explain. That's what wives are for, right? David found himself becoming quieter in groups. It was easier to let Lisa handle the conversations then, to risk saying something she would correct or contradict later. His friends started joking that marriage had made him more mellow. Lisa's got you well trained. His friend Tom would tease. You barely said a word at dinner last night. I'm just tired from work, David would reply, not knowing how to explain what was really happening. The worst part was how much everyone loved Lisa. His mother called her regularly, often talking to her longer than she talked to David. His friends invited them to events specifically because they enjoyed Lisa's company. His coworkers at the office Christmas parties spent more time talking to her than to him. You're so lucky, people would tell him constantly. Lisa is such a catch. She's beautiful, smart, funny, and she obviously adores you. David began to wonder if something was wrong with him. Here was this wonderful woman who everyone loved, who presented herself as the perfect wife, and he was feeling unhappy and confused. Maybe he was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just what marriage was like, and he needed to adjust his expectations. The moments of doubt grew stronger when he was alone. He would replay conversations and interactions, trying to figure out why he felt so uncomfortable in his own home. Lisa's public affection and private criticism created a constant state of confusion. That left him questioning his own perceptions. One evening, after Lisa had spent 10 minutes explaining to their dinner guests how David couldn't be trusted to buy groceries without a detailed list, he excused himself to the bathroom and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him seemed smaller somehow, less confident than he remembered. His shoulders were hunched, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He wondered when exactly he had started looking so tired and uncertain. When he returned to the dinner table, Lisa was in the middle of another story about his forgetfulness, and everyone was laughing. She caught his eye and gave him a loving smile, the kind that had made him fall for her in the first place. There's my husband, she said warmly. We were just talking about how lucky I am to have someone who keeps life interesting. David sat down and smiled back, still not understanding why her words of love felt so much like criticism, or why being called lucky felt so much like being called a burden. The confusion was becoming his constant companion, and he was starting to realize that the woman everyone saw in public might be very different from the woman he lived with at home. The company holiday party was supposed to be David's chance to shine. He'd been working on a major project for months, and his boss had hinted that a promotion might be coming his way. Lisa had spent an hour getting ready, choosing an elegant black dress that made her look stunning. You look amazing, David told her as they walked into the hotel ballroom where the party was being held. Thank you, honey, she replied, squeezing his arm affectionately. Now remember, this is important for your career. Try to make a good impression. The evening started well. Lisa charmed everyone she met, from David's co-workers to the company executives. She asked thoughtful questions about their work and remembered details from previous conversations. David watched with pride as his colleagues clearly enjoyed talking with her. Your wife is delightful, his boss told him during a quiet moment. You're a lucky man, David. I know I am, David replied, feeling grateful that Lisa was making such a positive impression. But as the evening progressed, something began to shift. When David mentioned his recent project successes to a group of co-workers, Lisa would add her own commentary. David's always been a dreamer, she said with a laugh when he talked about wanting to lead the new marketing initiative. He has such big ideas, but sometimes he doesn't think about whether they're actually realistic. The group chuckled politely, but David felt his face flush with embarrassment. He hadn't expected Lisa to undermine him in front of his colleagues later, when he was discussing the potential promotion with his manager. Lisa joined the conversation uninvited. "Oh, David mentioned that to me," she said with a bright smile. "I told him it might be a bit early for something like that. He's still learning so much in his current role." David's manager looked surprised. "Actually, we think David is ready for more responsibility. His work on the Johnson account was exceptional." Of course it was. Lisa agreed quickly. "I just worry that my husband sometimes gets ahead of himself. You know how men can be about their careers." The conversation became awkward, and David's manager excused himself shortly after. David felt confused and hurt. Why was Lisa saying these things? This was supposed to be his night to make a good impression. On the drive home, the atmosphere in the car was tense. David finally worked up the courage to ask Lisa about her comments. "I was just trying to help," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "You were bragging about yourself all night." "It was embarrassing." "I wasn't bragging," David protested. "I was talking about my work accomplishments. That's what you're supposed to do at company events." Lisa's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You made yourself look desperate and pushy." "I was trying to save you from making a fool of yourself. But you were making me look incompetent in front of my boss and co-workers," David said, his voice rising slightly. "That's when it happened." Lisa pulled over abruptly and turned to face him, her eyes flashing with anger. Without warning, she grabbed his shoulder and bit down hard through his shirt. The pain was sharp and unexpected, and David cried out in surprise. "Don't you ever speak to me like that again," she hissed, her face inches from his. "I spent all evening making you look good, and this is how you thank me?" David sat in stunned silence, his shoulder throbbing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Lisa had actually bitten him, hard enough to hurt. This wasn't the playful pinching from before. This was something else entirely. "I'm sorry," he said automatically, not sure what else to say. "I didn't mean to upset you." Lisa's expression softened immediately, as if a switch had been flipped. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry too. I just get so worried about your career. I want you to succeed so badly." She reached over and gently touched his shoulder where she had bitten him. "Did I hurt you?" "I didn't mean to be so rough." David didn't know how to respond. The bite had definitely hurt, and he could feel it throbbing even now. But Lisa seemed genuinely sorry, and she was looking at him with such concern in her eyes. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Let's just go home." The next morning, David discovered a clear bite mark on his shoulder when he looked in the bathroom mirror. The skin was bruised and there were visible tooth marks. He stared at it for a long time, trying to process what had happened. At breakfast, Lisa was back to her normal, loving self. She made his favorite coffee and asked about his plans for the day. She even apologized again for getting upset in the car. "I know I can be protective of you sometimes," she said, kissing his cheek. "It's only because I love you so much." David wanted to bring up the bite mark, but something held him back. Maybe it had been an accident. Maybe she really hadn't meant to hurt him. He decided to wear a long-sleeved shirt to work and tried to forget about it. But forgetting proved impossible. Over the next few weeks, similar incidents began happening more frequently. If David disagreed with Lisa about something, she would find a way to hurt him when no one else was looking. A sharp pinch under the dinner table, a twist of his wrist when handing him something, and yes, more biting when she was really angry each time. Lisa would immediately apologize and explain that she hadn't meant to be so rough. She would be extra loving and attentive afterward, making David question whether he was overreacting to what might be accidents. The incidents always happened in private, and Lisa was always careful to target areas that would be covered by clothing. David found himself choosing his wardrobe based on what would hide any marks. Wearing long sleeves even in warm weather, his friends began to notice changes in his behavior. He became quieter at social gatherings, more hesitant to express opinions. When people asked if everything was okay, he would brush off their concerns, just tired from work. became his standard response. The worst part was how Lisa's public behavior toward him became even more affectionate. She would hold his hand constantly when they were out, call him pet names in front of others, and frequently tell people how much she loved and appreciated him. "You two are such a perfect couple," their neighbor Mrs. Chen said one afternoon as they were getting their mail. "It's so nice to see people who are still so in love after being married." Lisa beamed and squeezed David's hand. "He's my everything," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without him." David smiled and nodded, but inside he felt increasingly trapped and confused. How could the same person who publicly proclaimed her love for him hurt him so deliberately in private? One evening, their neighbor from across the street, Mr. Rodriguez, was working in his garden when he heard raised voices coming from David and Lisa's driveway. He looked up to see Lisa standing very close to David, her finger pointed at his chest. Her voice low but clearly angry. "You never listen to me," she was saying. "How many times do I have to tell you the same things?" David's response was too quiet to hear, but his body language spoke volumes. His shoulders were hunched, his head down, like someone trying to make themselves smaller. Mr. Rodriguez continued watching, concerned. He'd always thought David and Lisa were the perfect couple, always so happy and affectionate when he saw them together. But this looked different. This looked like someone being bullied. The next day, Mr. Rodriguez approached David while he was taking out the trash. "Everything okay over there?" he asked casually. "I couldn't help but notice you and Lisa seemed to be having a disagreement yesterday." David's face immediately flushed red. "Oh, that was nothing. Just a small misunderstanding about dinner plans." "Are you sure?" Mr. Rodriguez pressed gently. "If you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." David thanked him but insisted everything was fine. But as he walked back to his house, he realized that someone else had witnessed Lisa's behavior. Someone else had seen through the perfect couple image they presented to the world. That night, lying in bed next to Lisa, David stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of his life. During the day, Lisa would send him sweet text messages and call to check if he needed anything from the store. She would greet him with a kiss when he came home from work and ask about his day, with what seemed like genuine interest. But if he said something she didn't like, or if he questioned one of her decisions, her demeanor would change instantly. The sweet, caring wife would disappear, replaced by someone who seemed to enjoy causing him pain. David began to realize that he was walking on eggshells in his own home, constantly monitoring his words and actions to avoid triggering Lisa's anger. He was becoming someone he didn't recognize, quiet, nervous, always apologizing for things that weren't his fault. The breaking point came when Lisa's behavior started affecting his work. During an important client meeting, David found himself second-guessing every word he spoke, remembering Lisa's criticism from the night before about how he never knew when to stop talking. His confidence, once one of his strongest professional assets, was disappearing. His coworkers began to notice that he seemed distracted and unsure of himself. The promotion he'd been hoping for was starting to seem like a distant possibility. That evening, as David sat in his car outside his house, afraid to go inside and face whatever mood Lisa might be in, he finally admitted to himself that something was seriously wrong with his marriage. This wasn't normal newlywed adjustment or the typical challenges of learning to live together. This was something much more serious, and he was beginning to understand that he needed help. The question was whether he was brave. David started paying closer attention to what was happening in his own life. It sounds simple, but for months he had been so focused on trying not to upset Lisa that he'd stopped noticing how bad things had gotten. Now, sitting in his car after work each day, he began to really think about what was happening to him. The first thing he did was start writing things down. Nothing fancy, just a small notebook he kept in his briefcase at work. He would write down what Lisa said and did, trying to remember the exact words she used. Reading his own handwriting made everything feel more real somehow. Tuesday, Lisa said I was embarrassing her by laughing too loud at dinner. When I tried to explain I was just enjoying myself, She grabbed my wrist and twisted it until I stopped talking. Friday, Lisa told our friends I'm terrible with money and can't be trusted with our credit cards. This isn't true. She's the one who makes all our financial decisions. Sunday, during church, Lisa smiled and held my hand the whole time. Pastor Johnson complimented us on being such a loving couple. When we got home, Lisa was angry that I had spoken to the new family without asking her first. She said I made her look like she doesn't have control over her own husband. The more David wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Lisa had two completely different personalities, and she could switch between them in seconds depending on who was watching. One morning, David noticed a particularly bad bruise on his upper arm, where Lisa had grabbed him the night before. He used his phone to take a picture of it. His hands were shaking as he did it, and he felt weird about photographing his own injuries. But something told him this was important. The turning point came during a visit to Dr. Martinez, his family doctor, for a routine checkup. David had worn a short-sleeved shirt because the weather was hot, forgetting about the marks on his arms until Dr. Martinez noticed them during the examination. These look like finger marks, Dr. Martinez said, gently examining David's upper arm. How did this happen? David felt his face get hot. He hadn't planned on anyone seeing the bruises, and he definitely hadn't planned on having to explain them. I bumped into something, he said quickly. You know how clumsy I can be. Dr. Martinez looked at him carefully. David, I've been your doctor for 5 years. These marks don't look like they came from bumping into furniture. They look like someone grabbed you very hard. Something about the doctor's kind but serious tone made David's careful walls start to crumble. Before he knew it, he was telling Dr. Martinez everything about Lisa's two different personalities, about the biting and pinching and grabbing, about how confused and scared he felt in his own home. Dr. Martinez listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking a gentle question. When David finished talking, the doctor was quiet for a moment. David, what you're describing sounds like domestic abuse, he said finally. I know that might be hard to hear, especially since Lisa presents herself so differently in public. But the behavior you're describing is not normal or acceptable in a marriage. Hearing someone use the words domestic abuse to describe his situation was shocking. David had always thought of abuse as something that happened to other people, usually women. He'd never imagined that a man could be a victim, especially not from someone as small and charming as Lisa. Dr. Martinez gave him a phone number for a counseling center that specialized in helping people in difficult relationships. They have experience with all kinds of situations, he said. You don't have to handle this alone. That evening, David sat in his car outside his house for almost an hour, staring at the phone number. Finally, he worked up the courage to call. The woman who answered was named Jonna, and her voice was warm and understanding. David found himself telling her things he'd never said out loud before, about how he felt like he was losing himself, about how he'd started to believe that maybe he really was as incompetent and forgetful as Lisa said he was. What you're experiencing is called gaslighting, Jonna explained. It's when someone makes you question your own memory and perceptions. It's a very common tactic used by people who want to control others. Jonna helped David understand that nothing he had done caused Lisa's behavior and that her actions were not his fault. She also helped him realize that the situation was likely to get worse, not better, over time. People who behave this way rarely change on their own, she said gently, and they often escalate their behavior when they sense their partner is becoming aware of what's happening. David started seeing a counselor named Dr. Peterson once a week. At first, he felt embarrassed talking about his situation. He was a grown man, successful in his career, and yet he felt powerless in his own home. Dr. Peterson helped him understand that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of their size, gender, or success in other areas of life. Abusive people are very skilled at finding and exploiting their partner's weaknesses, Dr. Peterson explained. They often target people who are kind, empathetic, and want to believe the best in others. These are actually strengths, not weaknesses, but abusive people know how to use them against you. Through counseling, David learned to trust his own perceptions again for months. Lisa had been telling him that his memory was bad, that he was too sensitive, that he misunderstood her intentions. Now he was beginning to realize that his memory was fine and his feelings were valid. Meanwhile, Lisa seemed to sense that something was changing. David was becoming less apologetic, less willing to immediately accept blame for every problem in their relationship. Her behavior began to escalate in response. The biting became more frequent and more severe. Lisa would wait until they were completely alone, then attack him for perceived slights or mistakes. She seemed to enjoy the shocked look on his face. When the pain hit him, "You're different lately," she said one evening as they were getting ready for bed. "You're not as loving as you used to be. Are you having problems at work? Are you stressed about something?" David felt the familiar urge to apologize and reassure her, but his sessions with Dr. Peterson had taught him to pause before responding. "I'm fine," he said simply. "You don't seem fine," Lisa pressed. "You've been distant and cold. I feel like you're pulling away from me." "I'm not pulling away," David said. "I'm just tired." That's when Lisa's expression changed completely. The concerned wife disappeared, replaced by someone David barely recognized. "Don't lie to me," she said, her voice low and threatening. "I know when you're lying. You've been acting weird for weeks, and I want to know why." David felt his heart rate increase. This was the tone that usually preceded an attack, and he found himself automatically moving toward the door. "I'm not lying," he said. "I really am just tired from work." Lisa stepped closer to him, and David could see the anger in her eyes. "You think I'm stupid, don't you? You think I don't notice when you're keeping secrets from me." Before David could respond, Lisa lunged forward and bit his shoulder hard enough that he cried out in pain. But this time, instead of immediately apologizing afterward, she seemed satisfied by his reaction. "Maybe now you'll remember to be honest with your wife," she said calmly, as if she hadn't just attacked him. David went to the bathroom and looked at the bite mark in the mirror. This one was worse than the others, deep enough that he worried it might become infected. He took a picture of it with his phone, adding it to the collection of evidence he'd been gathering. The next day, he showed the picture to Dr. Peterson, who immediately expressed concern about the severity of the injury. "David, I think it's time to consider making a safety plan," she said. "Lisa's behavior is escalating, and I'm worried about your physical safety." A safety plan, Dr. Peterson explained, was a detailed strategy for how to leave an abusive relationship safely. It involved identifying safe places to go, people who could help, important documents to gather, and warning signs that might indicate immediate danger. David felt overwhelmed by the idea of leaving his marriage, but he also felt relieved that someone was taking his situation seriously. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. That week, David reached out to his old friend Tom, the one who had dragged him to the neighborhood barbecue where he'd first met Lisa. They met for coffee, and David found himself telling Tom everything that had been happening. Tom was shocked. "I had no idea," he said. "Lisa always seems so perfect when you're together. She's always praising you and acting like the ideal wife." "That's exactly the problem," David explained. "She's completely different when we're alone." Tom offered David a place to stay if he ever needed it, and promised to be available whenever David needed someone to talk to. Having this support made David feel stronger and more hopeful than he had in months. David also called his sister Rachel, who lived in another state. She had always been his closest family member, and he trusted her completely. Rachel was horrified when she heard what was happening and immediately offered to help in any way she could. "I never liked her," Rachel admitted. "There was something about the way she would speak for you that always bothered me, but I thought maybe I was just being overprotective." Having people who believed him and supported him made David realize how isolated he had become. Lisa had gradually cut him off from most of his friends and family, always with reasonable-sounding excuses. Now he was rebuilding those connections and remembering. The plan took 3 weeks to put together. Dr. Peterson had helped David think through every detail, from the timing to the paperwork to where he would go afterward. David felt nervous about every aspect of it, but he also felt more determined than he had in months. He waited until Tuesday when Lisa had to work late at the library. She mentioned that morning that she wouldn't be home until after 8, which would give him enough time to pack his essential belongings and leave before she returned. David had already moved his important documents to Tom's house, 1 or 2 items at a time over several weeks. His birth certificate, passport, social security card, and bank statements were all safely stored in a box in Tom's spare bedroom. He'd also opened his own checking account at a different bank, something that felt both terrifying and liberating. The hardest part was deciding what to take with him. David had lived in this house for 2 years, but as he looked around, he realized how little of it actually felt like his. Lisa had made most of the decorating decisions, chosen most of the furniture, and gradually replaced his belongings with things she preferred. He packed the suitcases with clothes and a few personal items that meant something to him, a photo of his parents, a watch his grandfather had given him, a book his sister had bought him for his birthday. Everything else could be dealt with later, through lawyers if necessary. David left a letter on the kitchen table where Lisa would be sure to find it. He'd written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to find the right words. Lisa, I am leaving our marriage. I cannot continue to live in a relationship where I am constantly criticized, controlled, and physically hurt. I have found a safe place to stay, and I will be contacting a lawyer about divorce proceedings. Please do not try to contact me. David, reading it one final time. David felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The marriage he'd hoped for was over, but the nightmare he'd been living was ending too. His hands were shaking as he turned the key in the lock and walked away from the house. Tom was waiting in his car at the end of the block, ready to drive David to his apartment where he'd be staying temporarily. How are you feeling? Tom asked as they drove away. Scared, David admitted, but also free. Lisa's response was swift and intense. She called David's phone 17 times that evening, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. When he didn't answer, she began texting him. David, what is this letter supposed to mean? Come home right now so we can talk about this. I don't understand why you're being so dramatic. Every couple has problems. We can work this out. You're embarrassing me in front of the neighbors. Mrs. Chen asked me where you were. What am I supposed to tell people? This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child having a tantrum. Come home. David showed the messages to Dr. Peterson during an emergency session the next day. She pointed out how the messages revealed Lisa's true priorities, her image, and control, rather than David's well-being or their relationship. Notice how she doesn't ask if you're okay or acknowledge that you might have legitimate reasons for leaving. Dr. Peterson observed, she's focused on how your actions affect her, not on what might have caused you to take such a drastic step. When David didn't respond to her calls and texts, Lisa changed tactics. She began calling his friends and family, presenting herself as the confused and heartbroken wife who had been abandoned without explanation. David just disappeared. She told his mother over the phone. He left a strange letter saying he wanted a divorce, but he won't talk to me about what's wrong. I'm so worried about him. Do you think he might be having some kind of breakdown? David's mother called him immediately. Concerned and confused. David, Lisa called me crying. She says you left without any warning. What's going on? David had prepared for this conversation, but it was still difficult. Mom, I know Lisa seems upset, but there's a lot you don't know about our marriage. She's not the person she appears to be in public. It took several long conversations, but eventually David's family began to understand what he'd been going through. His sister Rachel was particularly supportive, offering to fly out and stay with him during the divorce proceedings. Lisa's campaign to portray herself as the victim became more elaborate. As time went on, she posted on social media about going through a difficult time and asked for prayers and support. She told their mutual friends that David had become abusive and controlling, and that she was afraid of him. Some people believed her version of events. Lisa was convincing, and she had years of building her reputation as the perfect wife to draw on. but others who had witnessed her behavior toward David began to speak up. Rodriguez, the neighbor who had seen Lisa berating David in their driveway, came forward to support David's version of events. "I saw how she treated him," he told David's lawyer. "She was always putting him down and making him look small." Dr. Martinez also provided documentation of the injuries he had observed, and David's reports of the circumstances that caused them. The photographs David had taken proved crucial in establishing a pattern of physical abuse. The divorce proceedings were contentious. Lisa fought every aspect of David's requests, from the division of property to the restraining order he had requested. Her lawyer portrayed David as an unstable man who was making false accusations against his loving wife, but David's documentation proved invaluable. His notebook with detailed records of incidents, the photographs of injuries, and the testimony of witnesses who had observed Lisa's behavior painted a clear picture of what their marriage had really been like. The turning point came when Lisa violated the temporary restraining order by showing up at David's workplace. Security cameras captured her following him to his car after work, screaming at him in the parking lot when he refused to talk to her. "You think you can just throw away our marriage?" she yelled, loud enough for several co-workers to hear. "You belong to me. You can't just leave." The security footage contradicted Lisa's claims that she was afraid of David and that he was the aggressive one in their relationship. Her own words and actions revealed her true nature to the court. The final divorce decree was granted 6 months after David left the house. Lisa was required to stay away from David in his workplace, and she was ordered to complete anger management counseling. David felt exhausted but relieved when it was all over. The man who had once doubted his own perceptions and blamed himself for Lisa's behavior had found his voice and his strength again. The healing process was gradual. David continued seeing Dr. Peterson, working through the trauma of what he'd experienced and learning to trust himself again. He had to relearn how to make decisions without constantly worrying about someone else's reaction, how to express opinions without fear of punishment, and how to recognize what healthy relationships looked like. About a year after the divorce was finalized, David met someone new. Her name was Karen, and she was a teacher at the elementary school where his niece went to school. They met at a school carnival where David was volunteering. What struck David most about Karen was how consistent she was. The way she treated him in private was the same as how she treated him in public. When she disagreed with him, she said so directly but respectfully. When she was upset about something, she talked to him about it instead of punishing him for it. "You're very careful about things," Karen observed one evening as they were making dinner together. "Like you're always checking to make sure everything is okay. Have you been hurt before?" David appreciated her directness. "Yes," he said. "My ex-wife was difficult. I'm still learning to relax." Karen nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. Good relationships shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells." David began speaking at support groups for men who had experienced domestic abuse. He discovered that his story was more common than he'd realized, and that many men struggled with the same shame and confusion he had felt. "Society tells us that men should be strong and in control," he would tell the groups. "But abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of their size or gender. It's not about physical strength. It's about psychological manipulation and control." His advocacy work gave David a sense of purpose and helped him feel like his painful experience had meaning. He was able to help other men recognize the signs of emotional abuse and understand that they deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. 2 years after his divorce, David felt like a completely different person. He was confident in his decisions, comfortable expressing his opinions, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his well-being. The scared, confused man who had spent months documenting his wife's behavior in a secret notebook was gone, replaced by someone who knew his own worth. On quiet evenings, David would sometimes think about Lisa and wonder if she had ever gotten the help she needed. He didn't hate her, but he also didn't miss the chaos and fear that had dominated their relationship. He had learned that loving someone didn't mean accepting their harmful behavior. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. David's story became one of hope for others in similar situations. He proved that it was possible to escape an abusive relationship, rebuild your life, and find genuine happiness again. Most importantly, he showed that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the first step toward freedom.